Imagine waking up in the middle of the night because it's really, really hot. You reach for your phone, no battery. Switch on the light, nothing happens. The fridge has stopped working, the fan has stopped, the internet has disappeared. Outside, everywhere is quiet, except for people asking exactly the same question. Has the power come back yet? Today we're talking about Cuba, where millions of people have once again, they found themselves living completely without electricity. It's not just a story about a power cut. This is a story about economics and politics, infrastructure, resilience, and ordinary people trying to live ordinary lives under extraordinary circumstances. While we explore this story, we're going to improve your English. I'll explain all the vocabulary naturally as we go. We'll look at the phrasal verbs, the idioms, and some important grammar that native speakers use every day. One of the things I always tell my students is that we often take electricity for granted. That's a phrasal verb, to take something for granted. It means to assume something will always be available without really appreciating it. I'm in Colombia, and where I live, the weather is always good, always very good. We just take it for granted. We don't appreciate it. Most people take electricity for granted until it disappears. In the UK, we definitely take electricity for granted. If your electricity goes off for an hour, you make a cup of tea or something, provided you had a gas stove. We'd complain a little. If it lasted an entire day, it would be national news. In Cuba, many people have become used to something very different. So earlier this week, it's now, what's the date? It's the 7th of July, 2026. The entire national electricity system collapsed again, leaving millions of people without power. This is the third nationwide blackout this year. It's maybe another reminder that the country's energy system is under enormous strain. Authorities began restoring electricity gradually, but essential services such as hospitals were given priority, while many homes remained without power. A blackout, by the way, when you read about this, you'll often be confronted with the word a blackout. It's a complete loss of electrical power over an area. We normally say things like, the city suffered a blackout, or there was a nationwide blackout. There's an interesting expression. I'm reading an article from The Guardian right now about this, about Cuba's blackout. To leave someone in the dark, that's an idiom. Literally, it means there's no light. But when we speak figuratively, it means to keep someone uninformed. You might hear examples like the company left its employees in the dark about the decision. So today, Cubans have experienced both meanings. Quite literally, they have been left in the dark. Now, from a British perspective, I'm British. I've lived in Colombia for the past 16 years, teaching just this way since 2010. This story is interesting, fascinating, however you want to describe it, because in the UK, our electricity system is something we never think about it. Our national grid isn't perfect. Storms occasionally damage power lines. Equipment sometimes fails. But the idea that an entire country could repeatedly lose electricity for days, that's almost unimaginable. That difference sort of highlights how much modern societies depend on reliable infrastructure. Infrastructure is just, it refers to the basic physical systems that allow a country to function. Examples of infrastructure, roads, bridges, railways, airports, water systems, and electricity networks. Without infrastructure, nothing else works properly. Now, the reports I'm reading, they describe Cuba's electricity grid as aging infrastructure. It's just infrastructure that has become old and worn out. Notice we don't normally say old infrastructure in news reports. You usually hear aging power stations, aging bridges, aging railway lines. That adjective, aging, it appears a lot in British journalism anyway. So why has this happened? There isn't one simple answer. That's something worth remembering, because whenever people start to talk about Cuba, whenever they discuss Cuba, opinions become political very quickly. Some people blame the Cuban government, others blame decades of US sanctions, and more recently restrictions on fuel supplies. Lots of analysts, they say both factors have played important roles. And that's important. Real life is usually more complicated than choosing one side or the other. Recent reports, well, what I've seen anyway, they describe a combination of aging power stations, insufficient fuel supplies, and long-term economic pressures that have left the electricity system increasingly fragile. Fragile doesn't mean physically weak in this context. It means easy to damage. You'll hear it used in ways like this, like the economy is fragile, the peace agreement is fragile, the electricity grid is fragile, easily damaged. We often use physical words in English, metaphorically. A bridge can be fragile, but so can an economy. We have a phrasal verb here, to break down. It means to stop working. The bus broke down. The washing machine broke down. The power station broke down. The verb's extremely common. I mean, if you compare that with collapse, a collapse is much stronger. If something collapses, it fails completely. The reports that I read, that I'm reading now, don't simply say that one power station stopped working. They say the national electricity grid has collapsed. It sounds much more dramatic. Now, I've already used two different past tenses here. So listen to this. The grid collapsed. People have become accustomed to blackouts. Now, why are those two different? The grid collapsed and people have become accustomed or used to blackouts. Well, the past simple, the grid collapsed. That's finished. It's a finished event. Complete, done, specific. But when we use present perfect to say people have become accustomed or used to blackouts, this connects the past to the present. The process started years ago, and the result is still true today. That's why journalists use the present perfect so much. It kind of explains how the past affects the present. I mean, imagine trying to live like this. It's the middle of the summer in the Caribbean. Temperatures are high, humidity is high, your fan doesn't work, your air conditioning doesn't work if you can afford air conditioning. The fridge is slowly getting warmer, and frozen food starts to thaw. That means to become unfrozen. The opposite of thaw is to freeze. So imagine, I don't know, if you own a small cafe. No electricity, no refrigeration, no coffee machine. There's no internet payment system. You can't serve customers, you can't keep food fresh, you can't earn money. So for many people, the blackout isn't just uncomfortable. It directly affects their income. We have a phrasal verb here, to cope with. It means to manage a difficult situation. She coped with the pressure. The hospital is coping with increased demand. And families in Cuba, right now, are trying to cope with repeated blackouts. To be at breaking point, this is very relevant here. It perfectly describes what many Cubans must be feeling right now. To be at breaking point. It means to be almost unable to continue. You might hear the healthcare system is at breaking point. Parents are at breaking point. Many families feel they are at breaking point. It doesn't mean something has already failed. It means it's dangerously close. In this article in The Guardian that I'm reading, and also there's coverage in Reuters of this blackout, one of the comments, a resident, simply asked, how long is this going to go on? And that's a normal human reaction. The grammar is future continuous. How long is this going to go on? We use going to because the speaker expects the situation to continue. They're not asking whether another blackout will happen. They're asking how much longer this ongoing situation will last. You know, as I said, I'm from the UK, I'm a Brit. And one thing that stands out to me is that when we discuss energy in the UK, we're usually talking about electricity prices. Can we afford the heating this winter? Will energy bills increase? But in Cuba, many people are asking a much more basic question. Will there be electricity at all? That's an entirely different level of uncertainty. Maybe that's the biggest lesson from this particular story. Electricity isn't simply about lights. It's about healthcare and food, and education and business, communication, even sleep. Modern life itself. When the electricity disappears, everything slows down. Everything becomes harder. You know, we could ask a difficult question here. We could say, why has Cuba reached this point? Whenever Cuba appears in the news, people, they often expect a simple explanation. It's because of communism. It's because of American sanctions. It's because of corruption. It's because of old power stations. The truth is that it's not that simple. I personally believe if someone can explain a country's problems in one sentence, they're probably missing something. Complex means something that has many different parts or causes. You might hear the situation is extremely complex. Journalists often use this word, the word complex, when they don't want readers to assume that there's only one explanation. I think that's exactly right here. It's the right approach here. Much of Cuba's electricity is generated by large thermal power stations, and they burn imported fuel or domestically produced crude oil. Many of these plants, they were built decades ago, and they need constant maintenance. Now, over time, spare parts have become obviously more difficult to obtain. Maintenance has often been delayed. Failures have become more common. So together with these repeated, recurring fuel shortages, this has left the electricity system increasingly vulnerable. When you read these recent reports, it also says that authorities have been trying to restore power gradually after the latest nationwide outage, while investigating its immediate cause. By the way, to generate electricity just means to produce electricity. Wind turbines generate electricity. Hydroelectric dams generate electricity. It just means produce. And to maintain, when I'm talking about maintenance and to maintain, it means to keep something in good condition. Engineers maintain railways. You might hear the company maintains its equipment. If maintenance doesn't happen, problems slowly begin to appear. We have a saying, well, in the UK, it's an old British saying, a stitch in time saves 9. What it means is if you fix a small problem now, you avoid a much bigger problem later. If you imagine a tiny hole in your shirt, if you repair it immediately, no problem. If you ignore it, the hole becomes much bigger. Infrastructure works exactly the same way. Simplified, but that's what happens. A power station isn't repaired once every 20 years. It needs constant maintenance. Even if every power station were working perfectly, you still need fuel. And that's another major challenge for Cuba. Cuba imports much of the fuel it needs to generate electricity, to produce electricity. And in recent years, shipments have become less reliable because of financial constraints, lower supplies from key partners, and broader, wider, more widespread economic pressures. When less fuel arrives, generating enough electricity for the whole country obviously becomes much more difficult. A fuel shortage is just a situation where there isn't enough fuel available. We have petrol shortages, diesel, natural gas. Notice the word supply. Supply simply means the amount available. If supply increases, there's more available. It's just business English. Right. If you've ever read online discussions about Cuba, you'll know they become emotional very quickly. Some people argue that the country's centrally planned economy has reduced investment, slowed modernization, and made it harder to maintain essential infrastructure. Others argue that decades of US sanctions have made it significantly more difficult for Cuba to buy equipment or to obtain financing and import fuel. Both of these arguments appear regularly in serious reporting and academic analysis. And that doesn't mean that every expert agrees. It means that there are multiple factors being discussed. When we talk about sanctions, sanctions are economic or financial restrictions imposed by one country or a group of countries on another. You'll see restrictions on trade, that's a sanction, financial restrictions, export controls, all sanctions. But people confuse sanctions with an embargo. They're related, but they're not the same. They're not identical. An embargo is a government restriction on trade with another country. It's just a specific type of sanction. Now, in the UK, I come from the UK, so as someone from the UK, I think one of the most valuable habits we can develop is learning to separate facts from opinions. Facts tell us what happened. Opinions explain why someone thinks it happened. They're not always the same thing. Good journalism should clearly distinguish between the two. To depend on, that's a phrasal verb. It means to need something in order to function. You might hear or read, many countries depend on imported energy. Hospitals depend on electricity. Businesses depend on reliable internet. It's very common. You'll also hear to run out of. It means to have none left. We've run out of milk. The generator ran out of fuel. The hospital is running out of medicine, for instance. So, whenever politicians argue, ordinary people still have to get on with their daily lives. Whether you're a university student, with a laptop battery that's dead, if the internet isn't working, maybe you have an assignment due tomorrow, you can't study. Or if you're a doctor, the hospital has emergency generators, but they're saving electricity wherever possible. Imagine you're a shop owner. The refrigerators stop working. Food begins to spoil. To spoil, in the case of food spoils, it's when food becomes unsafe to eat. For example, you could say, the milk spoils, or the meat spoils during the blackout. There's an expression here, metonydium, to keep your head above water. It means to survive, financially or emotionally. Many small businesses are just keeping their heads above water. Comes from swimming. If your head stays above the water, you are surviving. But that's all you're doing, just surviving, keeping your head above water. I suppose that's how economies feel during prolonged, extended crises. They're still functioning, but only just. They're keeping their heads above water. Earlier, by the way, I said power stations have become more unreliable. Why didn't I just say power stations became more unreliable? Again, that's because I was describing a change that started in the past, and it's still true now. Again, that's present perfect. If you compare that with the electricity grid collapsed yesterday, it's just past simple. Finished. A finished event, specific time. That distinction is really important, absolutely essential, if you want your English to sound natural. There's a phrasal verb you'll hear constantly, to carry on. It means to continue. Life carries on. People carried on working. The repairs are carrying on. I think it's very British, really, but you hear it everywhere. During difficult times, people somehow carry on. Parents still look after children, teachers still teach, doctors still treat people, patients. Neighbors help each other. Life continues, maybe more slowly, maybe more painfully, but it continues, it carries on. Human beings, wherever they live, they adapt. They learn to adapt, or they have the ability to adapt. Sometimes they can't. But given enough time, somehow they find new routines. Candles replace light bulbs. Generators replace the grid. Neighbors share food before it spoils. Communities often organize themselves. Human beings are incredibly resilient. That means able to recover from difficult situations. For example, children are resilient. Communities are resilient. You'll maybe read, the economy needs to become more resilient. But resilience has limits. People can adapt, but they shouldn't have to adapt forever. What happens next? Because if you're living through these blackouts, you're probably less interested in who's to blame. You want to know what's going to happen next. When will life become normal again? That's a question that doesn't really have an easy answer. One thing we do know about electricity systems is this: they don't recover overnight. A power station isn't like changing a light bulb. An electricity grid is one of the most complicated engineering systems that humans have ever built. Thousands of kilometers of cables, hundreds of substations, power plants, transformers, control systems. You have maintenance teams and fuel supplies. Everything has to work together. If one major part fails, the consequences can spread immediately. That's what engineers call a cascade, or sometimes a cascading failure, where one problem triggers another until the whole system just shuts down. That's actually one explanation officials have given for previous nationwide collapses. The grid, by the way, when we talk about the electricity grid, it's the network that carries electricity from power stations to homes and businesses. You'll often hear things like the national grid or the power grid, or in a substation. I mentioned a substation, hundreds of substations. That's just a facility that controls and distributes electricity to different parts of the network. You don't need to become an engineer, but these are exactly the kinds of words you'll read or hear in English news reports, a substation. Now, maybe one of the most interesting discussions taking place at the moment concerns renewable energy. Could solar panels, or maybe wind farms, or hydroelectric power reduce Cuba's dependence on imported fuel? Now, many experts, they believe they could certainly become part of the solution. In fact, Cuba has actually begun expanding its solar capacity with international support, mainly from China. The government has long-term plans to increase the share of electricity produced from renewable sources. But specialists, they also point out that renewable generation alone is not enough. The country would still need major investment in transmission lines, battery storage, and investment in its aging electricity grid. Renewable energy, by the way, that's just energy that comes from sources which naturally replace themselves. Solar energy, wind energy, hydroelectric power, or geothermal energy. Oh, and battery storage. Those are systems that store electricity for later use. And this is becoming increasingly important because the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow, and electricity has to be available day and night. To invest in means to spend money today in order to improve the future. You might read, the government invested in infrastructure. It's not always directly related to money. Companies invest in research. Countries need to invest in renewable energy, for instance. Very useful in business English. Here's something worth thinking about. Even if billions of dollars suddenly become available, new power stations can't appear tomorrow. Large infrastructure projects take years, sometimes decades. We say Rome wasn't built in a day. Again, that's an old British saying. It means big achievements take time. Rome wasn't built in a day. You can't expect enormous problems to disappear overnight. You know, the most important lesson from this story has nothing actually to do with politics. It's about people. Behind every statistic, there's a family. Behind every headline, there's a grandmother maybe trying to keep medicine cool, or a student hoping to finish university. Maybe a taxi driver wondering whether there will be fuel tomorrow. A young couple trying to raise children, or a business owner hoping customers will return. We forget that sometimes. News stories can just turn to numbers. They can become numbers. But people aren't numbers. One sentence from a report I read stayed with me. A Havana resident said, "The heat, the mosquitoes, it's unbearable." Another asked, "How long is this going to go on?" I think it was Reuters. I was reading Reuters. But those comments capture the exhaustion many people feel after months of repeated blackouts and uncertainty. The heat, the mosquitoes, it's unbearable. How long is this going to go on? Quite powerful, really. It reminds us that people don't live inside political debates. They live inside real houses with real families, trying to solve real problems. When we say unbearable, by the way, we just mean something so unpleasant that it's almost impossible to tolerate. The pain was unbearable. The heat was unbearable. The noise became unbearable. The phrasal verb here, to get through. It means to successfully survive a difficult period. You'll hear people say, "We'll get through this." The family got through the winter. The country is trying to get through the energy crisis. Now, when I teach this in Colombia, I always say that when you hear "get through," it always indicates difficulty, obstacles, problems. Whether you're driving, it's often difficult to drive through Bogota. You have COVID, you'll hear people say, "We are going through COVID." Another phrasal verb is to bounce back. It means to recover after difficulties. The economy bounced back. She bounced back after surgery. Let's hope the country can bounce back. It's quite positive. Earlier, by the way, I said Cuba has begun expanding renewable energy. Present perfect. The process started, and it's still continuing today. If I said the government announced new projects last year, that's past simple. It's finished. The event is completed. The announcement is complete. Specific time. Again, present perfect connects the past with the present. Past simple, we're talking about completed events, even if that's just an announcement. Native speakers, they switch between these two tenses constantly. There's another useful future structure. Renewable energy may become increasingly important. Notice the modal verb, may. We use may when something is possible, but it's not certain. If you compare, for instance, renewables will solve the problem, it's very certain. Renewables may help solve the problem, it's just possible. May is much more cautious. Journalists actually use may a lot because they are careful not to claim certainty when the future is uncertain. I think I read in one of these reports, there's light at the end of the tunnel. It's a famous English idiom. What it means is that there are signs that a difficult situation is finally improving. There's light at the end of the tunnel. I don't know, you could hear after years of problems, there's finally light at the end of the tunnel. I suppose it's quite appropriate for this episode, because today we've literally been talking about light. So, I want to finish with something personal. As a Brit, I think one of the greatest privileges we have in the UK is being able to switch on a light without thinking, to boil a kettle, or charge a phone, or open the fridge, or turn on the heating in the winter. It's essential. We don't even notice these things until we lose them. And stories like this story about Cuba, they remind us that modern civilization depends on systems that are easily overlooked. Electricity, water, transport, healthcare, the internet. When they work, we don't even think about them. We take them for granted. But when they fail, we suddenly realize how interconnected everything really is. To keep the lights on literally means to continue supplying electricity. But figuratively, it means to keep a business or an organization operating. You might hear the company is struggling just to keep the lights on. It's very, very common in business English. Now, whether your political opinions lean to the left or to the right, whether you believe the greatest responsibility lies with Cuba's government or with decades of external pressure, or maybe you believe it's a combination of both, one thing that almost everyone can agree on: millions of ordinary people deserve reliable electricity. They deserve hospitals that can function, that work, schools that can teach, businesses that can open, families that can sleep through the night, and children who don't grow up wondering whether the lights will come on tomorrow. When you're learning English, stories like this do something else as well. They remind us that language isn't just grammar and vocabulary. Language allows us to understand the lives of people we've never met. It allows us to listen before we judge, to ask questions before we reach conclusions, and maybe, perhaps, same thing, maybe, perhaps. That's one of the most valuable skills we can ever learn. So thank you very much for listening. If you've enjoyed today's episode, keep practicing your English, keep learning, listen again, repeat the expressions aloud. See if you can use the phrasal verbs, the idioms, naturally in your own conversations. Until next time, take care. Thanks for listening to Listen Global English. Bye-bye for now.